On June 6, 1944, the world watched as American forces stormed Omaha Beach in one of history's most famous military operations. The images are iconic landing craft hitting the beach soldiers, wading through surf under withering fire, the desperate fight up the bluffs. Omaha Beach has become synonymous with D-Day itself, the symbol of Allied courage and sacrifice. But 7 miles east, British and Canadian forces were landing at Sword Juno and Gold Beaches, with a different mission and a different enemy. Their objective wasn't to secure beachheads and link up. It was to capture Caen, a medieval city that Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had promised to take on D-Day itself. They didn't take it on D-Day. They didn't take it in a week. The Battle for Caen lasted 6 weeks, consumed 3 major offensives, destroyed an entire city, and inflicted casualties that exceeded the American toll at Omaha Beach by orders of magnitude. Over 80,000 Allied casualties killed, wounded, or missing. Entire divisions ground down to remnants. The cream of the Wehrmacht's armoured forces concentrated in a killing ground that made Omaha look like a skirmish by comparison. Yet this battle, the longest, bloodiest, and strategically most important fight in Normandy, remains largely unknown outside military history circles. D-Day was the beginning. Caen was the price. This is the argument for why the Battle of Caen deserves equal attention to the American beaches, why the British and Canadian sacrifice at Caen was the anvil against which the entire German defence in Normandy was shattered, and why understanding D-Day without understanding Caen is like understanding a novel by reading only the first chapter. The reason Caen is overshadowed is straightforward. American cultural dominance shaped how D-Day is remembered. Hollywood tells American stories. Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan immortalized Omaha Beach but never mentioned Caen. The band of brothers followed American paratroopers, not British tank crews. The narrative structure of popular memory emphasizes American sacrifice, American heroism, American achievement. This isn't conspiracy or deliberate distortion. It's natural that American culture emphasizes American experiences. But the consequence is that half of the Normandy story disappeared from popular consciousness. The British and Canadian contribution was numerically comparable to the American effort on D-Day itself. Of the 156,000 Allied troops landing on June 6th, approximately 75,000 were British and Canadian. 3 of the 5 landing beaches, Gold, Juno and Sword, were British and Canadian objectives. British forces suffered over 4,000 casualties on D-Day, comparable to American losses. Yet the popular image of D-Day focuses almost exclusively on Omaha and Utah, with occasional mention of American paratroopers. The eastern beaches and their objectives fade into background detail. This imbalance extends to the broader Normandy campaign. American operations, the breakout from Saint-Lô-Paton's drive across France, the liberation of Paris dominate historical memory. British and Canadian operations are mentioned primarily when they fail to achieve objectives on schedule, particularly Montgomery's inability to capture Caen quickly. The narrative became that Americans won Normandy while British forces bogged down at Caen through overcaution or incompetence. This interpretation is not just incomplete, it's fundamentally wrong. Caen was where the German army in Normandy was destroyed, and that destruction made every subsequent American success possible. The strategic importance of Caen was apparent before D-Day. The city sat at the junction of roads and railways connecting Normandy to Paris and the rest of France. Its capture would give the Allies a communications hub, essential for breakout operations. More critically, the terrain around Caen was ideal tank country, relatively flat open fields, perfect for armoured operations. Montgomery's plan called for British and Canadian forces to capture Caen quickly, then push south and east, threatening to envelop German forces and cut them off from Paris. This would force the Germans to concentrate their armoured reserves against the British, preventing them from interfering with American forces breaking out through the more difficult Bocage terrain to the west. The plan failed on D-Day itself. British forces landing at Sword Beach pushed inland and came within 3 miles of Caen before being stopped by elements of 21st Panzer Division. That division, the only significant German armoured force near the beaches on D-Day, could have counterattacked the landing beaches with potentially catastrophic results. Instead, it moved against the British threat toward Caen. This was exactly what Montgomery's plan anticipated. The Germans recognized that British forces threatening Caen represented the greatest strategic danger and reacted by concentrating forces there rather than against the Americans. The pattern established on D-Day continued for 6 weeks. The German High Command's response to D-Day confirmed Montgomery's strategic logic. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and General Geyer von Schweppenberg, commanding Panzer Group West, received orders to prevent Allied breakout at all costs. They identified the British threat toward Caen as the most dangerous Allied axis of advance. Consequently, they concentrated Germany's elite armoured divisions, 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, Panzer Lehr Division, 21st Panzer Division, and later 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, Adolf Hitler, in the Caen sector. These weren't ordinary Wehrmacht units. They were the best equipped, best trained, most fanatical divisions Germany could field in 1944. They were supposed to be the counterattack force that would drive the Allies back into the sea. Instead, they were committed piecemeal to defensive fighting around Caen, where Allied artillery, naval gunfire, and air power methodically destroyed them. The first major offensive toward Caen, Operation Perch, began on June 10th. British XXX Corps attempted to outflank Caen from the west, swinging around through Villers-Bocage. The operation initially made good progress, but collapsed on June 13th when a single German Tiger tank commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann ambushed the lead British column at Villers-Bocage, destroying or disabling over 20 tanks and armoured vehicles in 15 minutes. The British withdrew. Villers-Bocage became legend, a symbol of German tactical superiority and British incompetence. But the operational reality was more complex. Operation Perch had forced the Germans to commit 2nd Panzer Division and additional units to stop the British advance. Those divisions were now locked in defensive positions rather than counterattacking American beaches. The tactical defeat achieved strategic success by pulling German armour toward British positions. The fighting around Caen through June was attritional warfare at industrial scale. British and Canadian forces attacked repeatedly, each time advancing a few miles before German counterattacks stopped them. Each attack consumed men, tanks and supplies. Each German counterattack consumed men, tanks and supplies. The difference was that the Allies could replace their losses and the Germans couldn't. British tank losses were made good within days by replacement vehicles shipped from England. German tank losses were irreplaceable. The factories that built Panthers and Tigers were in Germany under constant air attack, producing at rates that couldn't keep pace with combat losses. The casualty rates were staggering. British and Canadian infantry divisions suffered 25% casualty rates in the first month. 1 in 4 men killed, wounded, or missing. Some units were worse. The 51st Highland Division lost over 4,000 men in 3 weeks. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division suffered over 5,000 casualties by the end of June. Tank regiments were effectively destroyed and rebuilt multiple times as replacement vehicles arrived to replace knocked-out tanks. The psychological toll on survivors was immense. Men watched friends die, were wounded themselves, recovered, and returned to the same grinding combat. German casualties around Caen were worse. 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend entered combat on June 7th with approximately 20,000 men. By the end of June, effective strength was below 5,000. Panzer Lehr Division was combat ineffective, by mid-July reduced to a fraction of its authorized strength. 21st Panzer Division was ground down through continuous defensive fighting. The Germans weren't just losing battles, they were losing the strategic reserve that was supposed to win the campaign. Every Tiger tank destroyed at Caen was a Tiger tank that couldn't stop American forces breaking out in the west. Every SS Panzer Grenadier killed at Caen was a soldier who couldn't reinforce the collapsing front elsewhere. Operation Epsom, launched June 25th, demonstrated the scale of British commitment to the Caen battle. British Weight Corps, 3 infantry divisions, 2 armoured brigades, and hundreds of artillery pieces attacked south of Caen toward the Odon River. The objective was to cross the river, capture high ground beyond, and envelop Caen from the southwest. The attack penetrated German lines and reached the Odon despite fierce resistance. Then German armoured reserves counterattacked. 2 SS Panzer Corps, 9th SS Panzer Division, and 10th SS Panzer Division had been held in reserve near Paris. Hitler released them to stop Epsom. The result was some of the most intense armoured combat of the Normandy campaign. British and German tanks fought at ranges measured in hundreds of yards. Artillery from both sides turned the battlefield into a moonscape. Casualties on both sides were horrific. Epsom achieved limited territorial gains, but accomplished the strategic objective. It forced Hitler to commit his strategic armoured reserve to defensive fighting at Caen, rather than counterattacking American positions. The human experience of fighting at Caen was qualitatively different from the beach landings. D-Day was intense, but brief hours of desperate fighting, then consolidation. Caen was sustained combat over weeks. Soldiers lived in foxholes under constant artillery fire. Tank crews fought repeated engagements, watching comrades burn in knocked-out vehicles. The bocage terrain west of Caen provided some cover, but made manoeuvring difficult and created endless opportunities for ambush. The open terrain south and east of Caen exposed troops to long-range fire from German tanks and anti-tank guns. Neither environment offered safety. Death came from artillery shells that arrived without warning, from tank guns firing from concealed positions, from snipers, from air attacks, from mines and booby traps. The fighting was more intense and sustained than anything American forces faced until late July. Operation Charnwood, launched July 8th, was the direct assault on Caen itself. British and Canadian forces attacked from the north, supported by the heaviest preliminary bombardment of the campaign. Over 2,500 aircraft dropped 7,000 tons of bombs on German positions around Caen. The bombing was supposed to suppress German defences. Instead, it destroyed much of the medieval city, killed hundreds of French civilians, and created rubble that impeded British armour more effectively than German defenders could have. The infantry assault pushed through the rubble into house-to-house fighting. SS defenders contested every building, every street, every cellar. The British captured northern Caen by July 9th, but paid in casualties that exceeded 3,500 killed and wounded in 2 days. The Germans still held southern Caen and the industrial suburbs beyond. Operation Goodwood, launched July 18th, was Montgomery's attempt to break through completely. This was the largest British armoured operation of the war. 3 armoured divisions attacking on a narrow front, supported by over 2,000 aircraft dropping 7,000 tons of bombs. The plan called for armour to punch through German defences and race south toward Falaise, cutting off German forces in Normandy. The operation looked perfect in planning. In execution, it was catastrophic. German defences in depth, multiple lines of anti-tank guns hidden, Tigers and Panthers artillery pre-registered on likely avenues of advance, devastated the British armour. Over 400 tanks were knocked out in 3 days. Goodwood gained 6 miles at a cost that shocked even hardened veterans. Critics, particularly American commanders and reporters, accused Montgomery of incompetence and excessive caution. But Goodwood accomplished exactly what Montgomery intended. It forced the Germans to concentrate every available armoured unit at Caen to stop the British breakthrough. 7 panzer divisions, the majority of German armour in Normandy, were committed to defensive positions around Caen. They stopped Goodwood, but in doing so, they weren't opposing American forces preparing for Operation Cobra, the breakout operation that would shatter German defences and liberate France. On July 25th, when American forces launched Cobra against weakened German positions in the west, there were no panzer divisions available to stop them because they were all at Caen. The strategic relationship between Caen and Cobra is the key to understanding Normandy. Montgomery's role was to draw German strength toward British and Canadian forces, while American forces built up strength for the decisive breakout. This required British and Canadian divisions to attack continuously, despite heavy casualties to threaten breakthroughs that would force German reaction to absorb counterattacks from Germany's best divisions. It meant accepting slow progress, high casualties, and criticism from allies and press who didn't understand the operational plan. Montgomery's personality, arrogant, condescending, unwilling to explain his decisions, made him an easy target for criticism. But his strategic design was sound. Caen was the anvil. American forces in the west were the hammer. The German army was caught between them and destroyed. The casualty statistics tell the story. From D-Day through the end of July, British and Canadian forces suffered approximately 40,000 casualties. 16,000 killed, 24,000 wounded. German casualties in the same sector exceeded 100,000. 7 panzer divisions were rendered combat ineffective. The German army's ability to conduct mobile defense collapsed. When American forces broke out during Cobra, German resistance disintegrated because the units that should have stopped them were destroyed or pinned at Caen. The liberation of France, the race to Paris, Pétain's dramatic armoured thrusts, all were possible because British and Canadian forces had broken the back of German resistance at Caen. The comparison to Omaha Beach illuminates the disparity in historical memory. Omaha Beach was a tactical crisis that lasted approximately 6 hours and cost 500 American casualties. It's remembered as the defining moment of D-Day. The Battle of Caen lasted 6 weeks, consumed 3 major offensives, cost 40,000 British and Canadian casualties, and destroyed the German army in Normandy. It's barely remembered at all outside military history. The discrepancy isn't about relative importance. Caen was objectively more significant strategically. It's about which stories American culture chose to tell. British and Canadian soldiers who fought at Caen understood what they'd accomplished. They'd faced the best divisions Germany could field and defeated them through sustained attritional combat that ground German armour to remnants. They'd sacrificed friends, survived wounds, and returned to the same brutal fighting day after day. They'd endured criticism from American allies who thought Montgomery was incompetent and British forces were timid. They knew the truth that they'd fought the hardest campaign in Normandy, that their sacrifice had made American success possible, and that history would likely forget them. Veterans of Caen spoke with bitterness about how D-Day became synonymous with American beaches, while British and Canadian contributions were relegated to footnotes. The physical destruction of Caen symbolized the battle's intensity. The medieval city, historic churches, ancient streets, buildings that had stood for centuries was reduced to rubble by Allied bombing and weeks of artillery fire. Over 3,000 French civilians died in the liberation. The survivors emerged from cellars to find their city destroyed, their homes gone, their lives shattered. The irony of liberation through destruction wasn't lost on them. The Americans who liberated Paris did so with minimal damage to the city. The British and Canadians who liberated Caen did so by destroying it. This difference reflected the nature of the fighting. Paris fell quickly when German defences collapsed. Caen had to be taken building by building against elite SS divisions willing to fight to the last man. The German perspective on Caen confirms its strategic importance. Rommel and von Rundstedt both identified the British threat toward Caen as the greatest danger to German defensive strategy. Their continuous demands for reinforcements, their insistence on concentrating armour at Caen, despite Hitler's orders to counterattack elsewhere. Their assessment that losing Caen meant losing Normandy all testified to how critical the sector was. German commanders weren't being fooled by Montgomery's strategy. They understood exactly what he was doing. They simply couldn't find a better response than concentrating their best forces at Caen and hoping to stop British offensives through defensive fighting. That strategy failed, but any alternative would have been worse. The post-war debate about Montgomery's generalship focused heavily on Caen. Critics argued he'd promised to take the city on D-Day, failed repeatedly, wasted lives in futile attacks, and then claimed his failures were part of a planned strategy of attrition. Defenders argued that drawing German armour toward British positions was the plan from the beginning, that the heavy casualties were the price of strategic success, and that focusing on territorial objectives missed the point. The debate continues among historians, but the operational results are undeniable. German armour was concentrated at Caen. British and Canadian forces absorbed the weight of German counterattacks. American forces broke out in the west and liberated France. The strategy worked regardless of whether Montgomery initially planned it that way. The legacy of Caen for British and Canadian military memory is complex. Pride in having fought and defeated Germany's best divisions mixes with frustration about historical neglect. Annual commemorations at Caen focus on sacrifice and remembrance rather than victory. A recognition that the battle was won, but at a cost that exceeded what could be celebrated. The massive Canadian cemetery at Bretteville-sur-Lez holds over 800 graves, most from the Caen fighting. The British cemetery at Bayeux holds over 4,000. These numbers exceed American graves from D-Day itself, but receive a fraction of the attention. The argument that Caen deserves equal attention to Omaha Beach rests on several foundations. First, the strategic importance was greater. Caen was the anchor of the entire Normandy campaign. Its capture unlocked the breakout that led to Germany's defeat in France. Omaha Beach was one of 5 landing sites important, but not uniquely decisive. Second, the scale of combat was larger. Caen lasted 6 weeks versus 6 hours at Omaha. Casualties were an order of magnitude higher. The intensity of fighting exceeded anything at the beaches after the first day. Third, the quality of opposition was superior. Elite SS Panzer divisions fought at Caen. Static coastal defense units defended Omaha. The difficulty of defeating the defenders was incomparably greater at Caen. The counter-argument is that Omaha Beach represents D-Day iconically in ways that longer, more complex battles cannot. The beach assault is visually dramatic, emotionally immediate, easily understood. The story is simple, brave soldiers storming defended beaches against terrible odds and succeeding through courage. Caen's story is complex weeks of attritional combat strategic maneuvers that aren't visually dramatic casualty lists that numbed rather than shocked. Popular memory gravitates towards simple narratives with clear heroes and definable victories. Caen doesn't fit that template, but historical accuracy should take precedence over narrative convenience. D-Day was the beginning of the Normandy campaign, but the campaign's outcome was decided at Caen. The British and Canadian forces who fought there deserve recognition commensurate with their sacrifice and achievement. They faced the hardest fighting, absorbed the worst counterattacks, and broke the German army's ability to contest Normandy. Without Caen, there is no breakout. Without the breakout, there is no liberation of France. The causal chain is direct and undeniable. The phrase, D-Day was the beginning, Caen was the price, captures the relationship. The beaches were necessary but not sufficient. Success required sustaining operations beyond the beaches, building up forces faster than Germans could reinforce, and defeating German attempts to drive Allies back into the sea. All of that happened at Caen. The price was 40,000 casualties, a destroyed city, and months of grinding attritional combat that broke men and units. But the price purchased victory in Normandy and opened the path to Germany. Recognizing Caen doesn't diminish Omaha Beach. Both were essential. Both required courage and sacrifice. But historical memory should reflect strategic reality. Omaha Beach was 6 hours of hell that secured one landing beach. Caen was 6 weeks of hell that destroyed the German army in France. Both deserve remembrance, but Caen deserves equal or greater attention because its impact on the war's outcome was greater. The men who fought at Caen understood this. They didn't minimize American sacrifice or achievement. They simply wanted recognition for their own. They wanted history to remember that British and Canadian forces bore the brunt of Normandy's hardest fighting, that they faced the best divisions Germany could field, and that they prevailed despite casualties that would have broken lesser forces. They wanted future generations to understand that D-Day was a joint operation where all participants contributed to victory, not an American operation where others played supporting roles. 75 years after D-Day, the imbalance in historical memory persists. Omaha Beach receives millions of visitors annually. Caen's battlefields receive thousands. American veterans' stories dominate documentaries and popular histories. British and Canadian veterans struggle for recognition. The next generation knows D-Day as synonymous with American beaches, but couldn't locate Caen on a map or explain why the battle mattered. This video argues for correcting that imbalance, not through diminishing American accomplishments, but through elevating British and Canadian contributions to their proper place. Caen was the hardest, longest, bloodiest, and strategically most important battle of the Normandy campaign. The forces that fought there deserve recognition commensurate with their sacrifice. D-Day was the beginning, Caen was the price. Both deserve to be remembered equally because both were essential to the victory that freed Europe from Nazi occupation.